The night was pitch black, with sheets of rain pouring down in relentless torrents. The Mitchells' SUV crawled along the slick, winding road, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a fragile beacon. Inside, tension buzzed as John gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Beside him, Sarah clutched the armrest, her brow furrowed with unease. In the back seat, Ellie and Ben were unusually quiet, sensing the unease in their parents. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the narrow bridge ahead, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. The wheels hit a patch of standing water, and the car skidded. John yelled, wrestling the steering wheel, but the tires lost their grip. Time seemed to slow as the vehicle spun sideways, crashing through the flimsy guardrail. Then, with a horrifying lurch, the SUV plunged into the icy river below. The impact was jarring. Water surged against the windows, and an eerie silence filled the cabin for a brief moment before screams erupted. "Mom, Dad," Ellie shrieked, her small hands clawing at her seatbelt. Ben sobbed uncontrollably, his voice trembling. "I don't want to die." Sarah twisted in her seat, desperately reaching for her children as the frigid water began to seep into the car. John, gasping for breath, fumbled to unbuckle his seatbelt, barking orders in a voice strained with fear. "Stay calm. Everyone stay calm." On the riverbank, Max, the family's golden retriever, barked furiously, his body drenched from the pounding rain. His sharp eyes darted between the sinking car and the swirling current. He whined, pacing frantically, as though calculating the impossible odds. Another flash of lightning illuminated his drenched fur and taut muscles, his face a portrait of raw determination. Inside the car, chaos reigned. Water was now ankle-deep, icy and relentless as it crept higher. The metallic groans of the vehicle echoed, warning of its imminent descent. Ellie, tears streaming down her face, pressed her hand against the window. "Max," she cried, her voice muffled but piercing. "Help us." On shore, Max's ears perked at the sound of her voice. His paws clawed the muddy ground, his bark growing sharper, louder. And then, without hesitation, he sprang into action. Max bounded to the edge of the river and plunged into the freezing water, the current immediately tugging at his powerful frame. The water was a merciless force, a churning vortex that threatened to drag Max under with every stroke. But he pushed forward, his legs kicking with unyielding strength. Each time his head disappeared beneath the surface, he re-emerged, his resolve unshaken. Back in the car, the water had reached waist level. John, now free from his seatbelt, frantically tried to break the windows, his fists slamming against the unyielding glass. "We're running out of time," he shouted, his voice raw with desperation. Sarah hugged Ellie and Ben tightly, whispering reassurances even as terror clouded her eyes. The car creaked ominously, tilting as it sank deeper. The river's cold grip stole their breaths, and their screams became hoarse and choked. Outside, Max swam closer, his amber eyes locked on the car. The camera zoomed in on his face, water dripping from his muzzle, his expression a mixture of fear and fierce determination. The car was almost fully submerged now. Inside, the family huddled together, their faces pale and desperate. As the water rose to their chests, Sarah kissed Ellie's forehead and whispered, "Close your eyes, baby." Max reached the car, his claws scrabbling at the side as he barked fiercely, his breath coming in short gasps. The rain pounded around him, the storm's ferocity mirroring the chaos in the river. He circled the sinking vehicle, searching for a way in, a plan forming in his canine mind. But before the audience could see what he would do next, the screen cut to black. What would you do if you saw someone in such desperate need? Could a dog possibly save a family from certain doom? Stay tuned to find out. The rain pattered gently against the wide kitchen window as Sarah Mitchell prepared breakfast, her movements brisk and purposeful. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but Sarah's expression betrayed no sign of calm. She glanced at her watch, then at the clock on the wall, frustration tightening her jaw. "Ellie, Ben, you're going to miss the bus," she called out, her voice cutting through the morning hum. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the weight of a mother trying to hold together a household perpetually on the verge of chaos. John walked in moments later, tie slightly askew, hair still damp from the shower. His face bore the weariness of another sleepless night. He dropped his briefcase by the door, offering Sarah a quick peck on the cheek. "Morning. What's the crisis today?" he asked, half joking but already bracing himself for the answer. "Crisis," Sarah shot back, hands on her hips. "Let's start with the fact that Ellie forgot to pack her science project. Ben hasn't touched his cereal, and I have a meeting in an hour I'm completely unprepared for. How's that for starters?" John sighed, pulling out a chair. "I'll handle the cereal rebellion," he offered, glancing toward the living room where the kids' voices mingled with the sounds of cartoons. Despite the chaos, there was warmth in his tone. Beneath their shared frustrations was a bond forged over years of navigating life's hurdles together. Their children, Ellie and Ben, were the light of their lives, though parenting them often felt like running a never-ending marathon. Ellie, at 10 years old, was an explosion of creativity and curiosity. Her room was a treasure trove of sketchbooks, science kits, and half-finished crafts. She often peppered her parents with questions that veered into philosophical territory, like, why do we have to work so much? Shouldn't people just spend more time having fun? Ben, 2 years younger, was her quiet counterbalance. Shy and observant, he was the kind of child who noticed the little things, the flicker of an old street lamp, the faint chirp of crickets at dusk. Though less vocal than his sister, Ben's love for his family ran deep, and his quiet presence often brought a calming energy to their hectic household. Among the Mitchells, however, the undeniable star was Max, their golden retriever. Max wasn't just a pet, he was a full-fledged family member. The children adored him, often curling up beside him on the floor to read or watch TV, their hands buried in his soft fur. For John and Sarah, Max was a source of unwavering loyalty and affection, a rare constant in their whirlwind lives. But Max hadn't always been part of their family. Years earlier, on a late evening much like the one when the Mitchells would later find themselves fighting for their lives, John had spotted Max as a scrappy stray wandering the streets. The dog was rail-thin, his ribs visible through his matted coat, but his eyes held a spark of intelligence and hope. John had just finished a grueling day at work and, truth be told, had little patience left. But something about the dog made him pause. "Seymour," Boy John had said softly, crouching down and extending a hand. To his surprise, the dog had approached cautiously, his tail wagging ever so slightly. From that moment, Max became part of their lives. It didn't take long for Max to prove his worth. He was fiercely intelligent, quick to learn commands, and even quicker to protect the ones he loved. One memorable summer day, the family was picnicking by the edge of a small wooded park. Ellie, then just 6 years old, had wandered a bit too far into the underbrush. Suddenly, she let out a sharp cry that froze everyone in place. "Snake," she screamed, pointing with trembling fingers at a coiled rattlesnake mere feet away. Before John or Sarah could react, Max darted forward, positioning himself between Ellie and the snake. The dog growled low and deep, his body taut and ready to strike if needed. The snake hesitated, sensing the danger, then slithered away into the undergrowth. Max stood his ground until it disappeared, only then turning back to Ellie, licking her face as if to say, "You're safe now." That moment cemented Max's place in the family as more than just a pet. He was their protector, their hero, and their companion through thick and thin. Ellie, who had been terrified of dogs before Max, now trusted him with all her heart, often confiding secrets to him she wouldn't share with anyone else. Ben, too, found comfort in Max, often seeking the dog out when the world felt overwhelming. As Sarah finally got the kids out the door that morning, Max stood by, wagging his tail. He had a knack for sensing when his family needed him most. John tousled the dog's fur as he headed for the door. "Hold down the fort, buddy," he said. Though both he and Sarah knew Max was more than just a sentry, he was a reminder of what truly mattered: family, loyalty, and love. But even Max couldn't anticipate the storm that would soon test them all in ways they could never imagine. Nestled deep in the rolling countryside, the Mitchells' town was the kind of place where life moved at a slower pace, and the beauty of nature enveloped everything. Surrounded by dense forests and crisscrossed by rivers, the town was a tranquil haven for those seeking a simpler life. Towering pines stretched skyward, their needles whispering secrets to the wind, while wide-open meadows bloomed with wildflowers in the warmer months, their colors a vivid tapestry of yellows, purples, and blues. The town itself was quaint, with narrow cobblestone streets lined with mom and pop shops, a single diner that served as the unofficial gathering spot, and a church whose steeple could be seen from almost every corner. The people were warm and familiar, quick with a wave or a kind word. Life here wasn't easy. Many relied on fishing, farming, or seasonal tourism, but it was fulfilling. Yet beneath this idyllic exterior lay a lurking menace. The rivers and creeks that gave the region its charm also made it prone to flooding during heavy rains. The Mitchells' home sat on the edge of this wilderness, a modest yet cozy house perched on a small hill. It was the kind of place where mornings were greeted by the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the trees, and evenings carried the distant hum of crickets and frogs. Their backyard was Max's domain, a sprawling green space bordered by a thick tree line. From there, the land sloped downward, leading to a narrow creek that snaked its way through the forest. John had always loved their home. It reminded him of his childhood summers spent camping with his father, learning to fish and build fires. For Sarah, the house had been an escape from the relentless noise of the city where she'd grown up. She often sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the kids play while Max darted around, chasing butterflies or barking at the occasional deer. The area was undeniably beautiful, but it wasn't without its dangers. The forests were dense and easy to get lost in, and the rivers, while serene on calm days, could transform into roaring torrents after heavy rainfall. The townspeople were no strangers to the consequences of sudden storms. Stories of flash floods and stranded travelers were passed down like cautionary tales, a reminder of nature's unpredictable wrath. The landscape was alive with contrasts. In the early mornings, a veil of mist often blanketed the fields, making the world look like an impressionist painting. Sunlight would eventually burn through, revealing a vibrant world teeming with life. Squirrels darted between trees, their tiny claws rustling the branches, while the call of a hawk pierced the air, echoing over the hills. Wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, their colors like scattered jewels on a green carpet. The rivers were the heart of the region, glistening ribbons of water that wove their way through the valleys. On clear days, they reflected the sky so perfectly that they seemed like pieces of the heavens brought down to earth. But the same rivers could become treacherous with the slightest provocation. During heavy rains, their calm surfaces turned into churning maelstroms, the water clawing at the banks, dragging soil and debris downstream. One particular spot, known as Clover's Bend, was both a favorite fishing spot for locals and a known hazard. The river took a sharp turn there, creating a deep pool where currents collided. Many spoke of how the water seemed to have a mind of its own, swirling unpredictably and pulling at anything that ventured too close. It was beautiful and deadly, a perfect embodiment of the land itself. As autumn began to give way to winter, the rains became more frequent, their steady drumming on rooftops a familiar sound. The Mitchells' town had seen a series of storms over the past few weeks, each one leaving the rivers a little higher and the ground a little more saturated. The normally sturdy bridge that connected the town to its northern outskirts was now slick with algae, its wooden planks groaning under the weight of each passing car. Max, ever watchful, seemed unsettled by the weather. He would sit by the window during storms, his ears perked and his tail motionless. It wasn't uncommon for animals to sense what humans could not, and Max's behavior had started to unsettle Sarah. "Do you think he knows something we don't?" she'd asked John one evening as the rain hammered against the windows. The nights grew darker, the moon often obscured by thick clouds that turned the sky into a shadowy abyss. The wind began to carry a mournful howl, weaving its way through the trees and sending shivers down anyone who dared to venture outside. The creek behind their house, usually a gentle trickle, had grown wider and faster, its surface dark and uninviting. On one particularly stormy night, Sarah noticed water pooling at the bottom of their driveway for the first time. "It's just the runoff," John reassured her, though his own gaze lingered on the creeping waterline. The land could only hold so much before it gave way. The final warning came from Mrs. Delaney, their elderly neighbor who had lived in the area her entire life. She stopped by one afternoon, her raincoat dripping and her face lined with concern. "The ground's too wet," she said, her voice low and serious. "If we get another big storm, those rivers won't hold. You be careful out there." John nodded, brushing off her concerns with polite gratitude, but her words stuck with him. He found himself glancing at the sky more often, noting the heavy clouds that seemed to linger even on dry days. The signs were all there, whispered warnings from the land and sky. Something was coming, and it was only a matter of time before the peaceful countryside would show its darker side. Mrs. Delaney had lived in the town for over 60 years, her life intertwined with the land's rhythms and moods. She was the kind of neighbor everyone wished for, warm, helpful, and always ready with a plate of cookies or a bit of advice. Her small cottage sat just across the road from the Mitchells' house, its garden overflowing with herbs and wildflowers, even as the late autumn rains began to leave their mark. She had a way of knowing things before anyone else did. "The land talks if you're willing to listen," she often said, her voice tinged with the wisdom of experience. She could read the clouds like an open book and sense the mood of the rivers by the way they flowed. On one dreary afternoon, she shuffled up the Mitchells' driveway, her boots caked in mud and her raincoat flapping in the wind. Max barked excitedly, wagging his tail as she approached. John greeted her at the door, brushing off his hands after a bout of fixing the storm drain. "Afternoon," Mrs. Delaney, John said, smiling. "What brings you out in this weather?" Mrs. Delaney's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Afternoon, John. I just thought I'd stop by to check on you folks. These storms we've been having, they're not like the usual ones." John raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. "You think we should be worried?" "I've seen this before," she said, her voice low. "The ground's too wet. The rivers are already swollen. If we get another big storm, the water's got nowhere to go." Her words hung heavy in the air. John chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, we've got Max to keep us safe," he joked, scratching the dog behind the ears. But Mrs. Delaney didn't laugh. She placed a weathered hand on Max's head, her expression somber. "Even the best of us can't fight nature, John," she said. "Be careful out there." The sheriff's office was a small, unassuming building near the center of town, its faded sign swaying slightly in the wind. Sheriff Tucker had been serving the community for over 2 decades, a steady presence in a place where little ever changed. He was a kind man, with a weathered face that betrayed years of long nights and hard decisions. Tucker had a reputation for doing the best he could with the limited resources at his disposal. In a town prone to seasonal floods and the occasional lost hiker, his job was often more about prevention than enforcement. But as the storms grew stronger and the rivers more dangerous, he found himself stretched thin. On the morning of the Mitchells' fateful drive, Tucker stood in his office, staring at a map of the area. Red circles marked problem spots, bridges on the verge of collapse, roads washed out, and areas where the rivers were dangerously high. His radio crackled with static, cutting through the heavy silence. "Sheriff, we've got a downed tree on Route 19. Looks like it's blocking the main road." A deputy's voice came through, weary and tense. Tucker sighed, rubbing his temples. "Copy that. Send a crew out to clear it, but keep an eye on the water levels. If the rain picks up again, we'll have bigger problems." He paused, his gaze drifting to the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. He knew better than anyone that when nature decided to strike, even the best prepared plans could crumble. His gut told him this storm was going to be different, but with only a handful of deputies and a town spread thin, there wasn't much he could do but wait and hope. The true antagonist of the story was not a person or a creature but the untamable force of nature itself. The land and rivers, so often sources of life and beauty, carried a latent menace that only surfaced under the right or wrong conditions. The storm brewing on the horizon was more than just weather. It was a harbinger of destruction, a reminder of humanity's fragility in the face of the elements. The signs were there for those who knew where to look. The once clear skies had grown heavy with dark clouds, their edges tinged with an ominous green. The air carried a weight, a suffocating stillness that made even the birds fall silent. The rivers, usually so calm and inviting, churned restlessly, their surfaces flecked with debris carried from upstream. The storm was no ordinary event. It was a convergence of forces, a sudden drop in pressure, a clash of warm and cold fronts that transformed a seasonal rainstorm into a monster. Meteorologists might have seen it coming, tracking its path from the safety of their offices, but for the Mitchells and the rest of the town, it was a silent predator, waiting for its moment to strike. Mrs. Delaney, with her quiet warnings, and Sheriff Tucker, with his unrelenting vigilance, were part of a web of lives connected by the land they shared. Each of them carried their own burdens, their own hopes, and their own fears, but none of them could foresee how deeply the coming storm would test them. As the first drops of rain began to fall that fateful evening, Mrs. Delaney stood by her window, watching the clouds gather with a mix of dread and resignation. Sheriff Tucker, miles away, checked his radio again, his instincts telling him it was going to be a long night, and the Mitchells, unaware of the growing danger, packed into their car, ready for a drive they hoped would bring their family closer together. Nature watched silently, its forces gathering strength, waiting for the moment when its power would be unleashed. The storm was coming, and with it, a test of resilience, courage, and survival that none of them would ever forget. The storm clouds had been brooding on the horizon all day, their dark forms swelling and swirling as if plotting their next move. Inside the Mitchell household, the tension was nearly as palpable as the weather outside. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of work deadlines, school projects, and sleepless nights. The cracks in their family dynamic, usually papered over by the demands of everyday life, were starting to show. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, wiping her hands on a dish towel and stealing a glance at John, who was hunched over his laptop at the dining table. "Do you ever stop working?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. John didn't look up. "I'm trying to get this proposal done, Sarah. You know how important this is." "And what about us?" she shot back, folding her arms. "We're important too." The argument fizzled as quickly as it started, replaced by an awkward silence. Neither wanted to escalate things further, not with the kids listening in the next room. But the distance between them was undeniable, a growing chasm that neither seemed to know how to bridge. It was Ellie, their 10-year-old daughter, who broke the tension. "Can we go for a drive?" she asked, appearing in the doorway with Ben in tow. "We haven't done anything fun together in forever." Sarah hesitated, glancing out the window at the gray sky. "It's not the best weather for a drive, sweetheart." "But it's not raining yet," Ellie pleaded. "We can take Max. He loves car rides." John closed his laptop with a sigh, sensing an opportunity to smooth things over. "She's got a point. A drive might do us all some good." Sarah bit her lip, debating. Then she caught sight of Max wagging his tail enthusiastically at the mention of his name, his excitement contagious. Fine, she relented, but only for a little while. The family piled into the SUV, Max hopping into the back seat with Ellie and Ben. The car rumbled to life, and for a moment, the tension seemed to ease. They drove out of town, following winding country roads lined with towering pines and rolling hills. The air inside the car felt lighter as they shared snippets of conversation. "Remember when Max tried to chase that turkey last summer?" Ben asked, giggling at the memory. John chuckled. The poor bird didn't know what hit it. Max barked as if in agreement, his tail wagging so hard it thumped against the seat. Even Sarah found herself smiling, though her eyes flicked nervously to the darkening sky. As the car climbed a hill, Ellie and Ben began squabbling over whose turn it was to pick the music. Ellie grabbed the auxiliary cord triumphantly, but Ben retaliated with a pout. "You always get to choose," he protested. "Because your music is boring," Ellie shot back, sticking out her tongue. "Enough, you two," John said, his tone firm but not harsh. "Why don't we just enjoy the quiet for a bit?" Sarah sighed, turning to glance at John. "You always say that, but maybe letting them argue a little wouldn't hurt. It's how siblings figure things out." John's jaw tightened. "So now you're saying I'm parenting wrong?" "I didn't say that," Sarah began, but she stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "Never mind." Max, sensing the rising tension, barked once and shoved his wet nose into Ellie's lap, earning a burst of giggles. "Max says stop fighting," Ellie declared, petting him. The dog's antics dissolved the tension, and soon even John and Sarah shared a faint smile. As they crested the hill, a familiar stretch of road came into view, a narrow, weathered bridge spanning a wide, fast-moving river. John slowed the car, his knuckles whitening on the wheel. "This bridge always makes me nervous, especially when the water's high," he said, half to himself. Sarah frowned, glancing at the river below. The water was darker than usual, its surface flecked with foam and debris. "Maybe we should turn back," she suggested, her voice uneasy. "We'll be fine," John replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "We've crossed this bridge 100 times. The SUV rolled onto the bridge, its tires humming against the wooden planks. Max whined softly, his ears twitching as he looked out the window. Ellie noticed and leaned forward. "What's wrong, Max?" she asked. But the dog simply stared at the water, his body tense. Just as they reached the midpoint of the bridge, the first fat raindrops splattered against the windshield. John switched on the wipers, but within moments, the drizzle turned into a torrential downpour. The rain hammered the car, obscuring their view and drowning out all other sounds. "Maybe we should turn around," Sarah said again, her voice louder this time to compete with the roar of the rain. John nodded, his expression grim. "Yeah, this is getting worse." Fast, he began to ease the car to the side, but the slick wooden planks of the bridge had already become treacherous. The wheels slipped, skidding slightly before regaining traction. "Dad, look out!" Ellie screamed, pointing to a large branch that had been swept onto the bridge by the surging river. John swerved to avoid it, the car jolting violently. For a heart-stopping moment, the SUV teetered on the edge, the river below roaring like a living beast. Everyone held their breath as John steadied the wheel, guiding them back onto the bridge. Max barked furiously, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. The rain came down in relentless sheets. The bridge groaned under the strain, and the river below churned with terrifying force. "Let's just get across," John said, his voice tight with fear. But before he could finish, a deafening crack echoed through the air. The family froze, their eyes wide with horror as they realized the bridge's structure was giving way. The storm had claimed its first victim, and the Mitchells were caught in its grasp. The bridge groaned ominously, the rain pounding down in unrelenting sheets. The Mitchells' SUV crept forward, its headlights barely cutting through the thick curtain of water. The family was tense, the air inside the car thick with unspoken fear. The river below, swollen and furious, churned with a menacing roar. Suddenly, the tires lost grip on the slick wooden planks. The SUV swerved violently to the left. John's knuckles whitened as he fought to regain control, the steering wheel jerking in his hands. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice tight with panic. The car fishtailed wildly before smashing through the flimsy guardrail. Time seemed to stretch as the vehicle tipped, its nose angling downward. Ellie's scream was cut short as gravity pulled them into freefall. The family barely had time to brace before the SUV crashed into the icy river below with a deafening splash. The impact was brutal. Water surged against the windows, momentarily disorienting everyone. The SUV rocked violently, caught in the current, and began to sink nose first. Inside, chaos erupted. "Dad!" Ellie screamed, her voice high-pitched and raw. She clawed at her seatbelt, her small hands trembling. "Stay calm," John shouted, his voice strained but commanding. He twisted in his seat, trying to check on the kids. "Sarah, Unbuckle them. We need to get out. Sarah's hands fumbled with Ben's seatbelt as the water surged into the car. It's stuck, she cried, her voice thick with panic. Ben whimpered, clutching his mother's arm. I don't want to die. Within seconds, the frigid water was ankle-deep and rising fast. John cursed under his breath as he slammed his shoulder against the driver's door, but it wouldn't budge. The pressure from the outside was too great. The windows, he yelled, his voice hoarse. We need to break the windows. Max, sitting in the back with the children, began barking furiously. His deep, urgent barks filled the confined space, cutting through the sounds of rushing water and rising panic. He scrambled to the window, his paws pressing against the glass, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Ellie, Ben, stay close to Max, Sarah urged, her voice trembling. She finally freed Ben's seatbelt, pulling him into her arms. Ellie, shivering, clung to Max, burying her face in his fur. Max, do something, she sobbed, as if the dog could magically fix everything. The water was now waist-high, and the family was running out of time. The car creaked ominously as it shifted, the current tugging at it like a predator dragging its prey. Max's barks grew more frantic, his sharp intelligence taking over. He lunged at the back window, his claws scrabbling against the glass. With a mighty push of his hind legs, he pressed his weight into it, trying to force it open. But the glass held firm. Good boy, Max, John encouraged, his voice breaking. Keep trying. Max leapt over Ellie and Ben, moving to the side window, his wet nose pressed against the edge where a sliver of air remained. He whined sharply, his breath visible in the freezing air. Then, in an instant, he lunged at the window again, this time using his teeth to grab hold of the small opening in the frame. The scene cut to black for a moment, heightening the suspense. Miles away, Sheriff Tucker stood in the dimly lit office of the local emergency response center. His map, now covered in red ink and post-it notes, bore grim witness to the havoc the storm was wreaking. Reports flooded in through the radio, each more urgent than the last. Sheriff, the bridge on Route 19 is gone. A truck got swept off just 10 minutes ago. We've got a rescue crew heading there, but the roads are a mess. Tucker exhaled sharply, his hands braced on the edge of the desk. What about Route 14? Flooded, his deputy replied grimly. Trees down all over. We're stretched too thin. The sheriff's radio crackled again. 911 call just came in. Sounds like a family might have gone into the river near the old Willow Bridge. No visuals yet. Locals say they saw a car go off. Tucker's face hardened, his jaw tightening. He grabbed his hat and coat, already heading for the door. I'm on my way. Get someone to Route 14 to clear those trees as soon as you can. Sheriff, if this rain keeps up, the deputy began, but Tucker cut him off. We don't have time for if, just do what you can. As Tucker climbed into his truck, the camera cut back to the Mitchells, the stark contrast between his methodical urgency and their desperate struggle creating a sense of looming dread. Back in the river, the SUV was almost fully submerged. The water inside the car was up to their chests now, and the air was thick with fear. Ellie clung to Max, her sobs muffled against his fur. Ben clutched Sarah's arm, his small body trembling uncontrollably. John, we're running out of time, Sarah shouted, her voice edged with hysteria. John slammed his fists against the driver's side window, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Damn it, he roared, his frustration and fear boiling over. Max, undeterred, moved to the rear of the car, his paws splashing in the water as he barked furiously. Then, without hesitation, he leapt into the water that had overtaken the back seat, his powerful body cutting through the frigid current inside the car. His instinct to protect his family overrode any fear he might have felt. The camera zoomed in on Max's face as he swam to Ellie and Ben, nudging them gently but urgently toward the back window. His amber eyes burned with determination, a sharp contrast to the chaos surrounding him. The SUV tilted sharply, the rear lifting slightly as the nose became completely submerged. Water poured through every crack and crevice, gurgling ominously as it filled the interior. The family's breathing grew more labored, their voices hoarse from screaming. Max is trying to help, Ellie cried, her voice thin with desperation. We can't leave him. We're not leaving anyone, John replied, his voice raw. He turned to Sarah. We need to work together to get that window open. It's our only chance. The car creaked again, shuddering as the river began to pull it downstream. The storm showed no signs of relenting, its fury an unforgiving reminder of their peril. As the camera panned out to show the car being swept farther from the bridge, Max's bark rang out again, sharp, commanding, and resolute. Would it be enough to turn the tide? The screen faded to black, leaving viewers breathless and desperate to know what happened next. The SUV was sinking fast, its once sturdy frame now a helpless vessel in the river's merciless grip. The icy water clawed higher with each passing second, soaking the family to the bone. The remaining pocket of air inside the vehicle was dwindling, adding a suffocating pressure to the already overwhelming chaos. John fought against the water, his every movement sluggish and strained as the frigid cold drained his strength. He grasped at the dashboard, pulling himself toward the front window, but the glass was impenetrable. "Sarah, take the kids," he yelled, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Keep them calm, whatever happens." "I can't open the door," Sarah cried, her voice cracking with despair. Her hands fumbled with the handle, the pressure from the water outside making it impossible to budge. Ellie clung to Max, her small body trembling uncontrollably. "Don't let him go," she shouted as the water surged around them, her voice a desperate plea to the universe. In a sudden shift, the SUV tilted violently as it was dragged further downstream. Ben screamed, clutching Sarah with all his strength. The movement dislodged several loose items inside the car, one of which a heavy flashlight floated past John. He grabbed it instinctively, realizing they might have a chance. With all his strength, he struck at the window. The sound of shattering glass seemed almost like hope itself as the frigid river surged inside with renewed force. "Go, move," now John roared, shoving the flashlight toward Sarah to guide the kids through the opening. "Get them out first." Max, sensing the urgency in John's voice, leapt into action. He paddled through the water, his movements purposeful and strong despite the relentless current. The back window was now completely underwater, and Max pressed his nose against it, his bark muffled by the river's roar. "Max is trying to help," Ellie cried, tears streaming down her face, even as she struggled to stay above the rising water. But the current was too strong. Each time Max made progress toward the car, the river dragged him back, its icy grip unrelenting. His paws churned furiously, his tail acting like a rudder as he battled the elements. Determination burned in his eyes, but even Max, with all his strength and loyalty, couldn't defy nature's overwhelming force. Above the river, the storm raged on, its intensity increasing by the minute. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating the scene in stark flashes of white-blue light. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the lines between water and air, making it nearly impossible to see. The riverbanks, once firm and reliable, had turned to slick mud, their edges crumbling under the weight of the deluge. Miles away, Sheriff Tucker's truck plowed through flooded streets, its headlights barely cutting through the storm's gloom. Inside, the sheriff gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The radio on the dashboard crackled with reports of other emergencies: a downed tree blocking Route 14, a stranded motorist calling for help, and growing concerns about the bridge on Route 19. "Sheriff," the dispatcher's voice crackled through the static. "The call from the old Willow Bridge. Locals are saying it's the Mitchell family. They think their car went into the river." Tucker's stomach sank, the name instantly recognizable. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice grim. But in the back of his mind he couldn't shake the feeling that he was already too late. The storm was wreaking havoc on every road, slowing his progress to a crawl. Inside the SUV, the family had managed to push Ellie and Ben out through the broken window, their small bodies shivering as the cold water consumed them. Max swam to Ellie first, nudging her toward a half-submerged log that had caught against a bend in the river. "Grab onto it," Ellie Sarah shouted from inside the car. "Hold on tight." Ben, clinging to Max's fur, was barely able to keep his head above the water. Max barked sharply, his gaze flicking between the two children as he worked tirelessly to guide them to safety. The powerful current buffeted him, threatening to drag him under, but his determination was unyielding. Meanwhile, the SUV shifted again, sinking lower as the river claimed more of it. John and Sarah were still inside, their breaths coming in gasps as the water reached their chins. "We have to get out now," Sarah said, panic thick in her voice. "I know," John replied, his voice trembling. He tried to push Sarah toward the broken window, but the vehicle jolted violently, slamming him against the dashboard. Outside, Ellie's voice pierced the chaos. "Mom, Dad, please hurry." As Max fought to keep the children afloat, the storm seemed to intensify as if responding to their struggle. The wind howled, bending trees until their roots threatened to give way. Debris rushed down the river branches, leaves, and even pieces of the broken bridge. Each new obstacle added to the danger, raising the stakes with every passing moment. The Mitchells' survival seemed to hang by a thread. Sheriff Tucker's truck, still miles away, trudged through flooded streets and fallen branches. He gritted his teeth, his heart pounding as he pressed the gas pedal harder. "Just hold on," he muttered under his breath, though there was no one to hear him. "Just hold on." The camera cut between the sheriff's frantic race to reach the river, the family's desperate attempts to escape the sinking car, and Max's relentless efforts to keep the children safe. Each scene heightened the tension, leaving viewers on the edge of their seats. Would help arrive in time? Would Max's bravery be enough to overcome nature's wrath? The storm was unrelenting, its fury a reminder of just how small and fragile humanity is against its vast, unyielding power. The scene faded to black, the sound of rushing water and howling wind lingering like a ghost. The river roared with fury, a churning cauldron of icy water and debris, but Max's determination burned brighter than the storm's wrath. The golden retriever circled the partially submerged car, his paws kicking furiously as he battled the relentless current. Inside, John and Sarah fought to keep calm, their movements slowed by the freezing water that now reached their necks. Max swam to the front of the car, his eyes locking with John's through the fogged glass. His bark, though muffled by the water, carried a desperate urgency. He pawed at the partially open back window, his claws scraping against the glass as he tried to wedge it further open. But the pressure of the water was too strong, holding the window firmly shut. Max dove beneath the surface, his golden fur disappearing into the dark depths. He resurfaced moments later with a thick branch clamped tightly in his jaws, his instincts driving him to try another method. He swam to the car's side and began ramming the branch against the rear window with surprising force. The glass shuddered under the impact but refused to break. Max growled in frustration, dropping the branch and barking again, his voice echoing in the stormy chaos. As Max worked tirelessly to save the family, the narrative shifted into a series of flashbacks that highlighted his intelligence, loyalty, and unbreakable bond with the Mitchells. A vivid memory of a summer day when Max saved Ellie from a rattlesnake in the woods. His growl had been the only warning before he lunged between her and the venomous creature, risking his life to protect her. The family's awe at his courage deepened their love and trust in him. A montage of Max as a younger dog, eagerly learning commands from John. "Fetch," Max John called, throwing a stick into the creek. Max retrieved it with unerring precision, his tail wagging proudly. The bond between man and dog was evident, built on mutual respect and love. A quiet scene of Sarah sitting on the porch during a particularly rough day, her eyes brimming with tears. Max had approached her, resting his head on her lap. His silent presence had been more comforting than words, a testament to his empathy and connection with the family. Each flashback underscored Max's extraordinary character and reinforced the stakes of the current crisis. This wasn't just a dog trying to save his owners, this was a family member fighting for his pack. Inside the sinking SUV, the situation was growing more dire by the second. The water was up to John and Sarah's chins, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they clung to the last pocket of air. The cold was unbearable, numbing their limbs and sapping their strength. Despite the panic clawing at his mind, John knew he had to remain calm for his family. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady but urgent, "we're not giving up. I'm going to get us out of this." How? Sarah asked, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. Her hands gripped the headrest of her seat, her knuckles white. "Max is out there. He won't give up on us," John replied, his eyes flickering with determination. He pressed his hands against the windshield, trying to push it open, but the water's pressure made it impossible. "We need to buy time until we can break free." John turned to the kids, who were huddled on the back seat with Max nudging them from outside the window. "Ellie," Ben, he called, his voice softening, "I need you to listen carefully. Stay close to Max when you're out there. He'll keep you safe." "We're scared," Ellie sobbed, clinging to Ben. "I know," John said, his voice breaking slightly. "But you're brave, just like Max. You can do this." The river was relentless, dragging the SUV further downstream as the rain lashed against the windows like shards of glass. The once quiet creek that ran behind the Mitchells' house had transformed into a monstrous force of nature, claiming everything in its path. The car groaned under the strain, its metal frame buckling as the current tore at it. The storm intensified, each clap of thunder shaking the air with deafening ferocity. Lightning illuminated the scene in harsh bursts, revealing the true scope of the devastation: uprooted trees, submerged debris, and an unrelenting torrent of water. Max, undeterred, barked once more and dove under the water again. He clawed at the edge of the rear window, using his powerful hind legs to kick against the current. Inside, Ellie pressed her small hands against the glass, tears streaming down her face. "You can do it, Max," she whispered, her voice trembling but full of hope. John, aware of how little time they had, began instructing Sarah to work on the window while he shifted to the back seat. His fingers, numb from the cold, fumbled as he reached for anything that might help break the glass further. He found a heavy wrench from the emergency toolkit beneath the seat and immediately began hammering at the window alongside Max's relentless efforts. The window cracked slightly, the sound like a faint victory amidst the chaos. "We're getting somewhere," John shouted, his voice strained but determined. "Keep going." Sarah, now waist deep in water herself, turned to look at Ellie and Ben. "When the window breaks, you go first," she said, her tone firm but loving. "Don't wait for us. Just grab Max and hold on." Ellie nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Okay, Mom." Just as it seemed they were making progress, The SUV tilted sharply, nearly flipping onto its side as the river claimed more ground. The wrench slipped from John's hand, disappearing into the dark water. He cursed under his breath, the setback a cruel reminder of how precarious their situation was. The shattered edge of the rear window was just big enough for one person to fit through, but the sharp glass edges made it treacherous. Sarah glanced at John, her face a mix of fear and determination. "You go first," she said. "No," John replied firmly. "The kids go first, then you. I'm not leaving until everyone's out." Outside the car, Max barked again, his golden coat plastered to his body by the rain. He swam to the partially opened window, his body bracing against the rushing water as he wedged himself into the gap. His jaws clamped onto a piece of floating debris, dragging it aside to make room. Max's relentless efforts and the family's sheer determination painted a vivid picture of resilience. The scene ended on a moment of heightened tension as Max swam furiously against the current, and John, gripping the cracked window, made a desperate push to free his family. The storm roared louder, a reminder that the battle was far from over. Would their combined strength be enough to defy nature's wrath? The question hung heavy as the narrative shifted toward the next wave of challenges. Inside the sinking car, fear gripped each member of the Mitchell family, but amidst the chaos, a fragile yet powerful sense of unity began to emerge. John, though desperate, maintained his role as the anchor. "We're getting out of this," he said, his voice unwavering. "No matter what happens, we're sticking together." Sarah, despite the terror etched on her face, managed a faint smile as she looked at Ellie and Ben. "You hear your dad? We're not giving up," she said, pulling them close. Her warmth was a lifeline in the freezing water. Ellie clung to her mother with one arm and pressed her free hand against the window where Max paddled outside, barking and clawing. "Max," she whispered through the glass, her voice trembling but determined. "You can do it, boy. I know you can." Max barked sharply, his amber eyes locked on hers as if he understood every word. His tail wagged faintly, a rare moment of levity in the grim situation. For Ellie, that flicker of movement from Max was enough to spark hope. The narrative shifted briefly to Max's perspective, an imagined glimpse into the mind of the loyal golden retriever. From the moment the car veered off the bridge, Max's instincts had taken over. But even instincts had their limits. Fear and exhaustion threatened to creep into his resolve. Through Max's eyes, the river wasn't just a current, it was a living adversary, relentless and unyielding. Every time the water dragged him under, he emerged more determined. Images flashed through his mind, not in words but in feelings and memories. Ellie laughing as she tossed a stick for him to fetch, Ben snuggling against his fur during thunderstorms, John's proud voice calling him a good boy. These memories fueled Max's courage. His body ached from the cold, and the roaring river felt like it would tear him apart, but none of it mattered. His family was in danger, and protecting them was more important than his fear, his exhaustion, or even his life. Max barked again, his voice echoing over the torrent, a defiant challenge to the storm. Inside the car, as the water reached their shoulders, Ellie clutched her brother's hand. "Ben, remember what Dad says. Brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared. They're the ones who keep going, even when they are. We can do this." Ben nodded, his lips quivering. "But what if we don't make it?" John turned sharply at his son's words, his eyes blazing with determination. "Hey, none of that," he said. "You're a Mitchell, and Mitchells don't quit, right?" Ben sniffled but managed a small nod. "Right." Sarah wiped a tear from Ellie's cheek. "We're going to get through this because we're together. That's what matters." Max barked loudly again, punctuating her words with his own canine encouragement. Back in town, the storm had reached its peak. The rain came down in sheets, the wind howled like a banshee, and the rivers surged ominously close to their banks. At the local diner, where the town's social hub remained a lifeline even in emergencies, Mrs. Delaney burst through the door, her raincoat dripping and her face lined with worry. "The Mitchells," she called out, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathered townsfolk. "Their car went off the old Willow Bridge. I saw it before the storm got worse." The diner fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. Sheriff Tucker, soaked from head to toe, appeared in the doorway moments later. "I've got deputies clearing Route 14, but it's a mess out there," he said, his voice grim. "We'll need volunteers to help get to the river. Anyone with a boat or rope, step forward." Several locals immediately stood, including Hank, the burly mechanic who kept half the town's vehicles running, and Marcy, a paramedic who never hesitated in a crisis. "Count me in," Hank said, grabbing his raincoat. "I've got a fishing boat in my garage. I'll bring the first aid kit," Marcy added, already moving toward the door. The group hurried to assemble a rescue effort, their faces set with determination. The storm was merciless, but so was the resolve of the people who called this town home. As they braved the elements, their thoughts were with the Mitchells, and with Max, who had long been known in the community as more than just a dog. The car shuddered again as it shifted downstream, its metallic groans a stark reminder of how little time was left. But even in the direst moments, the Mitchells found strength in one another. John managed to crack open the back window further, creating a sliver of hope. "Sarah, help me push Ellie through," he said, his voice strained. Together, they maneuvered their daughter toward the opening. Ellie hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. "Ellie," Sarah said gently, cupping her daughter's face. "You're going to be okay. Max is right there. He'll take care of you." Ellie nodded, summoning her courage. She squeezed through the narrow gap, gasping as the icy river enveloped her. Max swam to her instantly, nudging her toward the floating debris he'd already secured near the car. "I've got her," John said, his relief palpable. "Ben, you're next." Ben hesitated, clutching his mother's hand. "I don't want to leave you." "You're not leaving," Sarah assured him, her voice soft but firm. "We'll be right behind you. Max will keep you safe." With a deep breath, Ben followed his sister, gripping Max's fur as the dog guided him to safety. As the children clung to the debris and Max circled them protectively, Sarah and John prepared to make their escape. The camera lingered on their hands as they clasped tightly, a moment of connection in the midst of chaos. "Ready?" John asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. "Always," Sarah replied. With one final push, they forced themselves through the opening, plunging into the freezing river. Max barked sharply, rallying his family to hold on and stay together. The parallel scenes of the Mitchells' struggle and the townsfolk's race to the river created a poignant contrast. As Max paddled tirelessly to keep Ellie and Ben afloat, Sheriff Tucker's truck splashed through the flooded streets, headlights cutting through the gloom. Hank's fishing boat was loaded onto a trailer, while Marcy checked her medical supplies, her jaw set with determination. The narrative teased the possibility of rescue while keeping the stakes high. The townsfolk's combined effort reflected the resilience of the human spirit, while Max's unwavering courage showcased the profound bond between humans and animals. The scene ended with Max swimming to a fallen log, barking to draw the family together as the river's current tried to tear them apart. The Mitchells, clinging to one another and to Max's strength, were battered but not broken. Would the townsfolk arrive in time to save them, or would they have to rely solely on Max's heroism to survive? The storm showed no signs of relenting, leaving the audience breathless with anticipation. As the storm intensified, a nearby rescue team was dispatched to aid those affected by the floods. This team, made up of experienced first responders and local volunteers, faced their own set of challenges as they navigated the treacherous conditions. Captain Ray Mathis, the team leader, a seasoned rescue worker who has faced countless natural disasters, his calm demeanor is tested as the storm pushes their resources and capabilities to the brink. Lila Tran, a young paramedic, eager but inexperienced, who struggles with self-doubt in the chaos. Derek Lawson, a local volunteer and former firefighter, determined to redeem himself after a past rescue attempt went tragically wrong. The team set out in 2 trucks equipped with boats, ropes, and emergency supplies. Their radios crackled with fragmented updates about road closures and rising water levels. Captain Mathis gripped the steering wheel tightly as he squinted through the rain-soaked windshield. "We've got reports of a family stranded near Old Willow Bridge," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. "It's going to be tough getting there." Lila scanned the map on her lap, frustration etched on her face. "The main route's completely flooded. We'll have to go around, but it'll add at least 30 minutes. Derek, sitting in the back seat, leaned forward. "That's too long. If they're in the river, every second counts." The team decided to split up, one truck heading toward the Mitchells, and the other responding to a stranded motorist further downstream. The parallel struggles of the rescue team mirrored the Mitchells' desperate situation, highlighting the immense effort required to battle nature's fury. As the Mitchells clung to each other amidst the chaos, John's mind flashed back to a defining moment in his childhood. He was 10 years old, sitting in a small fishing boat with his father, the two of them surrounded by the stillness of a calm lake. John's father, a rugged yet compassionate man, was teaching him how to row the boat. "It's all about balance," John, his father, had said, his voice steady and encouraging. "You can't control the waves, but you can control how you handle them." When a sudden gust of wind rocked the boat, young John panicked, clutching the sides. His father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stay calm," he said. "Fear's natural, but don't let it freeze you. Think, act, and trust yourself." This memory grounded John in the present. As the river surged around him and his family, he drew on his father's lesson. "We can't control this storm," he murmured, his voice more for himself than anyone else. "But we can control how we face it." John shared the story with Ellie and Ben, using it to instill courage in them. "Grandpa always said that when things get tough, we have to dig deep. That's what we're going to do, together." Amidst the chaos of saving the family, Max's innate sense of compassion led him to a surprising encounter. While circling the car and guiding Ellie and Ben to safety, Max caught sight of a small shape struggling against the current, a rabbit trapped on a piece of debris. Its tiny paws flailed as the water threatened to pull it under. For a brief moment, Max hesitated. His family needed him, but so did this helpless creature. His instincts warred within him, but ultimately his loyalty to life itself drove his decision. With a powerful stroke, Max swam toward the rabbit, his teeth carefully gripping its sodden fur. The current pulled at him, but Max's determination was unyielding. He carried the rabbit to a nearby log, nudging it to safety before turning back toward the family. This act of compassion underscored Max's extraordinary nature and reinforced the story's themes of courage, empathy, and the interconnectedness of all lives. The camera lingered on the rabbit for a moment, shivering but alive, before cutting back to Max as he rejoined the Mitchells. While Max and the Mitchells continued their fight for survival, the rescue team encountered a major obstacle. A fallen tree blocked their path, its massive trunk stretched across the road like a fortress. Derek jumped out of the truck, assessing the situation. "We can't move this on our own," he said, frustration clear in his tone. Lila, though overwhelmed, stepped forward with an idea. "If we can't go through, maybe we can go around. There's a hiking trail nearby, it might lead to the river." Captain Mathis nodded. "Grab the ropes and emergency kits. We're not stopping now." The team carried their supplies through the storm, their boots sinking into the mud as the wind whipped around them. The parallels between their physical struggle and the Mitchells' emotional and physical fight created a sense of synchronicity, weaving the two narratives together. The storm showed no signs of relenting. Lightning illuminated the sky, casting stark shadows over the river as the rescue team finally reached the water's edge. In the distance, the faint sound of Max's barking carried through the storm, a beacon of hope and desperation. The camera cut between the rescue team preparing their boat, the Mitchells clinging to Max and the floating debris, and the trapped rabbit, now perched safely but watching the chaos unfold. Captain Mathis shouted instructions over the roaring wind. "Follow the barking. That's our lead." The juxtaposition of human resilience, Max's heroism, and nature's relentless power set the stage for the climactic rescue effort. Each subplot fed into the central narrative, raising the stakes and deepening the emotional connection between the characters and the audience. The scene ended with the rescue team pushing their boat into the water, determined to reach the Mitchells before it was too late. Would they succeed, or would the storm claim another victory? The question lingered, pulling the audience further into the story. The river's roar was deafening, a relentless cacophony of rushing water and stormy winds. Max paddled frantically, his golden fur matted against his lean frame, his breath coming in sharp, labored pants. The Mitchells were running out of time. Their SUV was almost completely submerged, with only a small pocket of air remaining inside. Max circled the vehicle, his sharp eyes scanning for anything that could help. Then he saw it, a thick piece of driftwood, bobbing just a few feet away, caught in a swirling eddy. It wasn't ideal, but it was sturdy enough to potentially break the car's reinforced glass. Without hesitation, Max lunged for the branch, his powerful jaws clamping down on it as the current threatened to rip it away. The effort sapped what little energy he had left, but he fought through the exhaustion, dragging the driftwood back to the car. Inside, John noticed Max's frantic movements through the fogged and water-streaked window. "He's got something," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Max is trying to break the glass." The family rallied together, a powerful surge of determination cutting through their fear. Ellie and Ben pressed their hands against the glass, their eyes wide with hope. "You can do it," Max Ellie cried, her voice trembling but fierce. John turned to Sarah. "We need to help him. If he breaks the window, we have to be ready to push it out." Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. "Kids, get ready to move as soon as the window's open. Stay close to Max." Max swam to the rear window, where the glass had already been weakened by John's earlier efforts. He maneuvered the heavy driftwood into position, his legs churning furiously against the river's pull. With a sharp bark of effort, he began slamming the driftwood against the window. The impact sent vibrations through the car, a desperate rhythm that matched the pounding of the Mitchells' hearts. Each strike took more out of Max. His paws slipped against the glass, his body trembling with exertion. But he didn't stop. The family's voices inside the car fueled his efforts, their love and trust in him pushing him to give everything he had. The window cracked further, a spiderweb of fractures spreading outward with every blow. Inside, John positioned himself to help, pressing his palms against the glass. "Come on, Max. Just one more," he urged. With a final, bone-jarring slam, the driftwood shattered the weakened glass, the sound cutting through the chaos like a gunshot. Water surged into the car with renewed force, but the opening was big enough for the family to escape. "Go, go," John yelled, grabbing Ben and pushing him toward the window. Sarah followed, guiding Ellie as Max barked furiously, swimming in place to keep the current from sweeping him away. One by one, the Mitchells squeezed through the jagged opening, their movements sluggish from the cold and the rushing water. Ben went first, clutching Max's fur as the dog guided him to the safety of a floating log. Ellie followed, her small hands gripping Max's back like a lifeline. Sarah was next, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she fought the current to reach her children. "John, come on," she shouted, turning back toward the sinking car. John hesitated for a split second, his instincts screaming to ensure everyone else was safe first, but the car groaned ominously, its nose tilting downward as the river claimed it. With a burst of energy, he pushed himself through the window, gasping as the icy water closed over his head. Max swam to him instantly, barking sharply as if to say, "This way." John grabbed hold of Max's tail, letting the dog guide him to the others. The SUV's descent into the river was agonizingly slow yet horrifyingly final. As the Mitchells clung to the debris, the car's rear lights flickered one last time before disappearing beneath the surface. A geyser of bubbles erupted, and then it was gone, swallowed by the churning water. The family huddled together on the floating log, their breaths visible in the freezing air. Max circled them protectively, his sharp barks cutting through the storm as if daring nature to try and take them again. The river was still dangerous, and their fight wasn't over, but for the first time there was a glimmer of hope. Sarah wrapped her arms around Ellie and Ben, her tears mixing with the rain. "We made it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're alive." John placed a hand on Max's head, his own tears streaming down his face. "You did it, boy. You saved us." Max barked softly, his tail wagging faintly despite his exhaustion. For a moment, time seemed to pause as the family shared a silent, profound moment of gratitude and connection. In the distance, the faint glow of headlights appeared, cutting through the stormy night. Sheriff Tucker and the rescue team were finally closing in, their voices calling out over the roar of the river. "Hang on," Tucker shouted through a megaphone. "We're coming for you." As the rescue team's boat approached, the Mitchells' ordeal seemed to reach its climax. They were battered, soaked and freezing, but they were together and alive. Max, despite his exhaustion, gave one last triumphant bark as the rescuers threw ropes and pulled the family to safety. The Mitchell family finally reached the riverbank, their bodies trembling from the icy cold and sheer exhaustion. They collapsed onto the wet, muddy ground, gasping for breath, their faces pale but etched with profound relief. The storm raged on above them, but in that moment they were consumed by the overwhelming realization that they had survived. Max, their golden retriever and savior, staggered onto the shore behind them. His chest heaved with exertion, his golden fur slicked and matted, and his paws caked with mud. With one final effort, he dragged himself to the family and collapsed at their feet. His eyes, though weary, held a quiet triumph. Sarah reached out, her hands shaking, and pulled Max into her arms. "Oh, Max," she sobbed, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pressed her face into his wet fur. "You saved us. You saved all of us." In the distance, the rumble of an engine grew louder. Headlights cut through the storm's gloom as Sheriff Tucker and the rescue team arrived in their boat. The team hurried toward the family, their waterproof jackets glistening with rain as they leapt into action. Over here, John called weakly, waving an arm. His voice cracked with exhaustion but carried a desperate urgency. "We're here." The rescuers descended upon them, wrapping the family in warm blankets and checking them for injuries. Sheriff Tucker approached, his normally stoic face softening as he took in the scene. "You're one lucky family," he said, crouching beside them. "We've been searching for you all night." John nodded, his voice choked. "We owe everything to Max." As the rescue team worked to stabilize the family, their attention turned to Max. Lila, the young paramedic, knelt beside the dog, gently inspecting his paws and fur. "This dog is incredible," she said, her voice filled with awe. "He's been through so much, and he's still hanging on." Captain Mathis, the team leader, shook his head in amazement. "I've seen a lot in my years of rescue work, but this is something else. That dog deserves a medal." Max, despite his exhaustion, wagged his tail faintly at the sound of their voices. Ellie and Ben, now wrapped in thick blankets, clung to Max, their hands stroking his fur as if grounding themselves in his presence. "He's our hero," Ellie said softly, her voice full of admiration. "He didn't give up on us." As the team prepared to transport the family to safety, Sarah knelt beside Max once more. She cupped his face in her hands, her tears mixing with the rain still falling from above. Her voice trembled with emotion as she said, "He's more than a dog. He's our angel." The scene lingered on Sarah's words, their weight resonating with everyone present. The rescuers exchanged knowing glances, their respect for Max palpable. Sheriff Tucker nodded solemnly, tipping his hat toward the golden retriever. "He's got more courage than most people I know." The rescue team helped the family into the boat, ensuring Max had a spot beside them. Despite the cold and exhaustion, the Mitchells clung to one another, their relief almost tangible. They knew the road ahead would include recovery and healing, but for now they were safe, together, and deeply grateful. As the boat pulled away from the riverbank, Sarah held Max close, her fingers brushing gently through his fur. "We owe him everything," she whispered to John, her voice thick with emotion. John placed a hand on Max's head, his expression one of profound gratitude. "He reminded me of what matters most," he said softly. "Family, love, and never giving up." The scene ended with a quiet, reflective shot of the river. Though its surface still churned with the storm's remnants, the moment carried a sense of calm, as if even nature acknowledged the extraordinary struggle that had unfolded. In the distance, the lights of the rescue boat grew fainter as it carried the Mitchells and Max to safety. The camera panned to a small, shivering rabbit perched on a log, a subtle nod to Max's earlier act of compassion. Life, against all odds, had endured. The chapter closed with a sense of hard-won triumph and the unbreakable bond between a family and their loyal companion, leaving viewers with a deep appreciation for resilience, courage, and the power of love. In the days following the harrowing rescue, the Mitchell family's ordeal became the talk of the town and quickly spread far beyond it. Local reporters interviewed Sheriff Tucker, the rescue team, and even Mrs. Delaney, who had raised the initial alarm. The focus of every story, however, was Max, the heroic golden retriever whose extraordinary bravery had saved his family. Headlines such as "Dog Saves Family from Sinking Car During Deadly Storm" and "Loyal Retriever Risks Life to Protect Owners" appeared in newspapers and online outlets. A short video clip recorded by a member of the rescue team showing Max barking to guide the rescuers to the family went viral, capturing hearts worldwide. Social media erupted with posts celebrating Max's heroism. Pet lovers shared stories of their own animals' acts of love and loyalty, creating a wave of appreciation for the unique bond between humans and their pets. As Max's story gained traction, it sparked a broader conversation about the importance of pets in people's lives. Shelters reported an uptick in adoptions, with many inspired by the Mitchells' tale to bring a furry companion into their own homes. The town organized a special event to honor Max, presenting him with a medal and a proclamation declaring him a true hero and valued member of the community. Local children crafted cards and signs for Max, some of them featuring hand-drawn pictures of him with words like "Thank you, Max" and "Hero Dog." A local animal shelter launched a fundraising campaign in Max's name, using the story to promote pet rescue and adoption. The campaign quickly surpassed its goal, enabling the shelter to expand its services. For the Mitchells, the experience left a permanent mark on their lives. Sitting together in their now repaired home, they reflected on what they had endured and what they had learned. John, who had often been consumed by work, pledged to slow down and spend more quality time with his family. "I don't want to miss another moment," he told Sarah one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching Max chase fireflies with Ellie and Ben. Sarah, too, found herself re-evaluating her priorities. The storm had reminded her of the fragility of life, and she vowed to cherish every precious second with her loved ones. Ellie and Ben, though young, carried a newfound appreciation for courage and teamwork. "We're a team," Ellie declared during one family dinner, "and Max is the captain." Max, always near, became a living reminder of what they had endured and overcome together. Whether lounging at Sarah's feet, playing with the children in the yard, or sitting beside John as he worked from home, Max was more than just a dog. He was a symbol of love, loyalty, and resilience. The family's story also resonated deeply with others, prompting viewers and readers of the story to reflect on their own lives. Many shared their reactions online, with comments such as "This story reminded me to hug my dog today, and it's a wake-up call to appreciate the little moments with loved ones." Schools and community groups used the story as an example of teamwork, resilience, and the importance of never giving up. A feature article on the Mitchells' experience included a quote from John: "We were so focused on work and life's endless tasks that we forgot what really matters: each other." Max didn't just save our lives, he reminded us how to live. Months later, as the family celebrated Ellie's 11th birthday, Max sat proudly by her side, a garland of flowers draped around his neck, a tribute to his role as the family's hero. The house was filled with laughter, a stark contrast to the stormy night that had almost torn them apart. The Mitchells began volunteering at local shelters, sharing their story to inspire others to adopt rescue animals. Max became a minor celebrity in town, often greeted by pats and treats from neighbors who had followed his story. The camera lingered on a final, serene image: the Mitchells sitting together on their porch as the sun set, Max lying contentedly at their feet. The storm was now a distant memory, but its lessons were woven into the fabric of their lives. They were stronger, closer, and more grateful than ever before. The aftermath of the Mitchells' harrowing ordeal culminated in a heartfelt ceremony organized by the town to honor Max's heroism. The event was held at the community center, its walls adorned with banners reading "Max, our local hero," and photos of the golden retriever in action. Sheriff Tucker led the proceedings, his voice steady with admiration as he recounted the events of the storm. "Max showed us all what courage and loyalty look like," he said, holding up a small medal engraved with the words "Heroic Companion" before placing it gently around Max's neck. Ellie and Ben beamed with pride as they stood beside Max, who sat tall, wagging his tail and accepting the applause with dignified grace. The crowd erupted into cheers, and several townspeople came forward to shake John and Sarah's hands, expressing gratitude for sharing their story and inspiring others. Months later, the Mitchells' lives reflected the profound impact of their experience. The camera followed them through a day filled with moments of joy and reflection, underscoring how their second chance at life had brought them closer together. On a calm and sunny afternoon, the family revisited the spot near the riverbank where they had been rescued. Ellie and Ben ran along the water's edge, tossing sticks for Max to fetch. His golden coat gleamed in the sunlight, his movements lively and carefree. John and Sarah sat on a nearby log, their hands intertwined as they watched their children play. "It's hard to believe this is where it all happened," Sarah said softly. "But I'm glad we can be here together now, with Max by our side." John nodded, his gaze fixed on the river. "It reminds me of how fragile life is, and how much we have to be grateful for." As the family enjoyed their outing, the narrative shifted subtly to emphasize the ongoing challenges posed by nature. The river, though calm now, still bore signs of the storm's wrath. Fallen trees littered its banks, and the waterline had shifted, eroding parts of the landscape. John pointed out a newly installed flood gauge near the riverbank, part of the town's efforts to better prepare for future storms. "Nature's powerful," he said to Ellie and Ben. "We have to respect it, not fight it." The children listened intently as Sarah added, "That's why we have to do our part, whether it's planting trees, keeping the rivers clean, or just being mindful of how we live." The family's reflections served as a gentle reminder of humanity's role in protecting and coexisting with the environment, framing their personal story within a broader context of resilience and respect. Max's presence remained central to the family's transformation. From morning walks with John to quiet evenings curled up beside Sarah on the couch, Max symbolized their collective strength and the unconditional love that had carried them through the storm. On the anniversary of the storm, the Mitchells hosted a small gathering at their home, inviting friends, neighbors, and the rescue team. Max, wearing his medal, basked in the affection and attention, his tail wagging nonstop. During the event, Ellie presented a scrapbook she had made, filled with pictures, newspaper clippings, and drawings commemorating Max's heroism. "This is so we never forget how brave he was," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Max's story is more than a tale of survival. It's a testament to the incredible bond we share with our animal companions. Their love and loyalty remind us of the best parts of ourselves." When the storm tested their limits, the Mitchells showed us the strength of resilience and unity. And Max? He proved that courage knows no bounds, no matter the odds. The storm also taught us a vital lesson: nature is beautiful but unpredictable. It's up to all of us to care for our environment and prepare for the challenges it may bring. Did Max's story touch your heart? Do you have a pet who's made a difference in your life? Share your stories with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. And if you were inspired by Max's courage, consider supporting your local animal shelter or rescue organization. Every animal deserves a chance to be a hero. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share Max's story with your friends and family. Together we can celebrate the heroes among us, human and animal alike.